Hello, and welcome to Signs of the Times. I'm Shira, and I'm a frequency catalyst here to support the evolution of the human race. I'm joined by my co-host George, who will share our vision for this radio show, coming up next.
Aloha, everyone. Our intention with Signs of the Times is to open a portal of conversation where way showers, light bringers, and life visionaries, catalysts for change in other words, can share their insights, wisdoms, and tools with listeners like you so that we may all collectively raise our frequencies and thus bring forward loving, powerful change and help a new earth spring forth. The time is now. Join us and discover how you can make a difference. Enjoy the show. Welcome, everyone. In today's show, we're talking with someone Shira calls Margaret, the modern-day mystic. Margaret Blauvelt has 2 BA degrees in biology and education and has worked in information technology and academia. She's also spent a lifetime incorporating intuition and dream suggestions into her life. Her passion, though, is communication with those who cannot speak. Her greatest teacher was a mostly nonverbal boy with severe cerebral palsy and a fantastic sense of humor, whom she cared for over 5 years. With him, she learned to ask better questions and also honed a clearer communication process, thus changing her own thinking and, as she says, occasionally someone else's. Margaret's greatest joys, which continue from childhood through to this day, include birdwatching, gardening, sitting in the woods, and watching good movies with someone she loves. And in case you miss it in the interview, she revels in being of service to others. Let's go and join the conversation.
So give me a little bit of a history of who Margaret is, what she's coming to on the planet at this time in her life, what you aspire to, or what you feel your strengths are, what you feel you like to bring to the world right now. Just give us a little rendition of who you are.
I think I'm a longtime observer and participant. Sometimes I think I was at my best when I was about 7 years old, because because I seemed to have a good connection then, that then I wanted to see what all this social relationship was about, which is the normal kid thing. I want to fit in. And I remember looking back at myself when I was 12 years old and thinking, gee, I've lost something here. And I think that's about the time when my idealism really surfaced as a conscious thing. It's the time I joined the environmental movement. I was campaigning for the Tule elk when I was 12 years old, because I read an article about the Tule elk in California being an endangered species, and they wanted to have a Tule elk reservation. And I was really touched about 15 years ago when I realized I was driving by the Tule elk reservation in California that I had been campaigning for when I lived in Ohio as a 12-year-old. So,
Wow.
That's where probably the first time I really got social with my activism scared the heck out of me, because I had no idea what I was doing. And what I was doing was putting little messages in people's mailbox about the Tule elk. People used to have mailboxes in front of their houses, too cheap to pay the post office, so it wasn't even legal. But my heart was in the right place. I had a Tule elk T-shirt that I bought. Anyway, it was pretty cool. And then around the same age, I read my older brother's book. He had Edgar Cayce, The Sleeping Prophet. Well, The Sleeping Prophet, I think, is the name of the book, by Jess Stern, which was probably the first widely read account of Edgar Cayce. And it really impressed me, and I kept it in mind from then forward. And another thing that happened to me, that to me, these things are just small incidents, but to me, they were really deep, because it set me thinking in a certain way.
Yeah.
So the next thing along that line was, we had at my high school a week. They started doing a week every year when people from the community would come in and just teach whatever classes they felt they wanted to teach. And I took a meditation class. from a couple of ladies who were into the Edgar Cayce material. And, you know, that's the first time I meditated with a group. And I realized that I really like that. So following these impulses that you have and practicing what draws you is very important to growing towards what really matters to you, because it's what's within you that is going to give you a key to what's going to make you happy, to what you're here for. So for some reason, I was moved to volunteer, and my mom took me to some place where you could find out about youth opportunities for volunteering. And I volunteered to be an assistant at Camp Easter Seal in Toledo, where I lived. And I just love that group of kids because they don't fit anybody's boxes. They can't. They've chosen, or however this works, you know, they came into these childhoods with handicaps, and they were the most awesome kids. You know, they supported each other. They cared about each other. There was one girl who was totally blind, and she needed help to go spy on her friends. So I was helping her spy on her friends. We were trying to sneak up on them. And there was this other kid who I heard about, that he was also blind, but most of the kids there weren't blind, but for some reason they both come to mind. This little kid, like 5 or 6 years old. I remember hearing another counselor saying, he got out of the car, the person who met him at the car didn't realize he was blind, and he walked into the door and he said, "What are you trying to do to me?" And it was just so innocent and so funny. You know, there were all these things. It's like you don't encounter this sense of warmth and community very often.
Right.
And those kids just had it. They were just incredible. So then when I was 19, I decided I discovered a job. So I applied, and I was a counselor, and I was also a driver because I was 19 instead of 18 or 17. I had a little more driving experience. So that gave me a little extra, you know, one-on-one with the kids I was picking up. It just really mattered to me. So with that in mind, then I did what all women of my age back in the 1980 was when I graduated from college. I became a typist because I could type, and clerical was big back then, you know. But that was good too, you know. I got to interact with all these other women typists, and they were cool people. I found out people are cool. Yeah. I liked being in high school, but my first adult experience was really quite wonderful. And I didn't know how good I had it in some ways, but another long-standing issue in my life has been that I'm asymmetrical, and I didn't know it until I was a pretty old teenager, like 16. My pediatrician said, you know, by the way, you've got scoliosis. And my mom said, well, could it be because her legs aren't the same length? And she, you know, had me do a couple of things and say, yeah, that could be. And that was the end of that for a while until I was older. But I had back pain constantly. And I finally, you know, I spent years addressing that issue. My legs actually the bones are different lengths. And so I'm actually a kid who grew up with pain that was unrecognized, that was physical. And that gave me a lot to think back on. It changed, you know, it's like I thought I was awkward. Well, I wasn't awkward. I was unbalanced. I mean, literally unbalanced. And I do have to wonder, you know, why I came in that way, but I can kind of see it. I wasn't supposed to fit. I needed not to be able to fit so well. I had to stand up because my back hurt. By standing up, I had to stand out, you know, literally out. You know, I wasn't sitting with everybody else sometimes. And that gave me an interesting perspective, too. We take so much for granted. We all have to do the same thing. I was very shy, and now I have to stand up. This was good.
That kind of helps with the shyness. Like,
yeah.
You got to get thrown into the mix.
There's one thing I want to bring up as well. When I did massage training back in the UK, the one thing that I remember learning was most people's leg lengths are not equal. The majority of people have got slight imbalances. It's a matter of degree, but we are not symmetrical.
We think they are. If you ever take a photograph of somebody and split their face and put the one half reverse, completely different faces.
And I think that what you're bringing forward, Margaret, I think the value of what you're bringing forward is that you were triggered by all of these things to go deeper inside and ask questions. Most times, a lot, especially children and young adults, will try to just minimize what they think a problem might be within themselves and go on acting normal like everyone else, you know?
Right.
It's like, yeah. And it's like, and, you know, and my heart goes out to them because there is this essence of wanting to fit in, wanting to be like everyone else so that you don't have to feel different. And if we just taught our children that they were supposed to be different, that you're unique and everything about you is you, and that's why you have it, you know, instead of trying to make them fit, if we could give them that piece, then I think more children would do what you did. They would go inside and they would go, wow, what is this all about? Oh, why is this happening? You know, or they would be driven to, like, there aren't a lot of kids driven to go out and offer care to people who appear to be in more trouble than they are in their physical bodies, you know? Yeah. Or appear to be not as easy in their bodies. Kids are just not driven typically to do that. And a lot of kids, and I've seen this happen many times, will avoid looking at a child who's missing a leg, who's blind, who, you know, has an unusual limb. They'll avoid looking at them because they don't know what to think about it. They don't know how to handle it. They don't know. And, you know, something in them feels like sorry for them.
I find that the younger kids, until they're told by the adult,
yes,
they're not afraid to ask questions. You know, why are you the way you are? And the younger kids who are handicapped aren't afraid to tell them, you know, I have this and this condition. This is how I am. And because they know they've been dealing with it for a long time, they're actually happy to tell somebody how they are.
If somebody's brave enough to ask, absolutely. You know, that's how my daughter was with her sons. And I remember my daughter telling me one time that her son, they were in a store and there was a girl in a wheelchair, a young girl around his age in a wheelchair. And he goes, "Hey, Mom, that girl's in a wheelchair." And she said, "Yeah, I see that, honey." He goes, "Well, what do you think's wrong with her?" She said, "I don't know, honey. You know, go and talk with her." My daughter just encouraged him to go and talk with the girl in the wheelchair, you know, and he went over, and next thing you know, these two are in the middle of a store, you know, just getting to know each other, hanging out, talking. And this little girl in the wheelchair was so happy to have another child walk up and talk with her. You know, it's just like she didn't have to feel so different because somebody entered her space and just made a connection with her, you know. And I remember, because of the way I was raised with my own children, like not even wanting to put them in those spaces, because what if it made that child who wasn't like everybody else feel worse because my children were normal? You know, it's like I didn't have the clear information. I mean, I had the nurturing information of wanting to help, but I didn't want to make anybody feel tension or different, or because I was so entrained to try to fit in. And so it was many years later that I got broken open because I played that role for so many years. So what I hear you saying is, like, to me, the depth of a spiritual journey from a little child up, we're all on them, but many of us will avoid those extreme situations that you just kept putting yourself in over and over again. You know? It's like we'll avoid those to try and feel normal when we're not. None of us are normal. There's not a normal. You know, there are all these unique individuations, and we try to make something normal, and none of us fit those things, no matter how hard we try. So I hear a woman speaking to having taken a really deep spiritual journey that you did not try to hide away from, you know, that you took it on.
Well, you've led up to the next part of my personal journey very well. Because then as I'm working as a clerk typist, I worked my way up. I had touched a computer in college because I had also done some volunteer work with kids who were having trouble in school. They bus them to our college, and they did one. It's kind of like Big Brother, Big Sister for college. They called it something else, but basically we just hang out with them. And they found that when kids had somebody to hang out with once a week, you didn't have to tutor them. They just did better in school because they felt better. They were more encouraged. They just felt better about themselves, which was very cool. So I had this one girl I was working with, and then so I go on to become an adult. Didn't know what that was all about. So I start working. I had used a computer with this girl because we had done some math computer games back when they didn't have visual display monitors. The visual part, it was all you type something in and the computer prints something out. At least they had printing. You did punch cards. You could type. I was after the age of the punch cards. Thank goodness, because then in my job, having had a college degree and a tiny bit of experience, I managed to get into a job as a liaison with computer people, and I did training for word processing for the staff and for using the new computer system. And then eventually I worked into taking over from the liaison position I was taking over from a previous person. They wanted somebody who knew the agency well, and by then I had worked there 3 years. So I got to see everybody's position because I had to do workflow analysis and stuff. And my head loved it. Intellectually it was fun. But like I said, I had the back problems and stuff. And I was in a meditation group at the time, and I was exploring the spiritual ideas of create your reality. And I was reading Seth books by Jane Roberts, and I was getting all kinds of synchronistic things happening. Like literally a fish jumped out at my feet when I was Capitol Lake. I lived in Olympia, Washington, and go for lunch. I would live right next to the Capitol Lake, which is brackish water. It's where some creek or river, not really a river, it must be some creeks, meet the ocean. So it's a kind of saltwater lake. And I'm meditating, and then I stand up and I go for a little walk at lunchtime, and this probably a salmon just jumps out at my feet, and that was quite surprising, and whizzed back in the water. And then just to prove its point, it did it again. and I don't remember how I was relating the meaning with that one. I'm a Pisces, so twice two fish, that's good. But it just seemed to confirm that my spiritual path was good. So I look at things like that. And then I was looking at my job and thinking, this feeds my head, but it doesn't feed my heart, because although I can see the value, I worked for a small quasi-judicial agency that handles workers' compensation appeals. And if anybody ever hears this, they'll know exactly who I was if they happen to be working back then. It's quite a while ago now. Yeah, it was a good job, but I was having back problems, and I was having energy problems, and I thought, well, maybe this isn't my right path. I don't know if my conclusion was really valid, but I quit my job. I went into the teacher education program at the Evergreen State College, which was a brand new program at the time. So I didn't even get a master's degree out of it. I got a second BA, but that was okay. And then beginning my second year, I'm like, why am I doing this program? And I have this memory of, I was taking the bus home that day, and I had missed the bus, and I'm walking for a long, long ways and thinking to myself, why am I in this program? And I had this kind of a sudden vision, if you will, or impression of a handicapped kid and his mother. Well, I already knew I would like to work with handicapped kids. I had done it before. And I think I might have had a similar vision actually when I was in college and took a summer and went on a bicycle trip and kind of flashed on the same vision. But that was, maybe 5 years before. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And, I finished the program, still wondering, well, I don't like crowds. I don't want to do crowd control. I love working with kids. Why am I trying to do a teacher thing when I really don't want to dictate. I don't want to be a dictator in front of the classroom, which is why I ultimately went into Montessori. But anyway, long story short, I ended up teaching 2 different years in 2 different places. So I was like a first-year teacher in both places. And one of them was because my mom was dying at the time, and I taught in Florida for a year to be close to my parents. And I moved back to the West Coast and taught a year. And I got exhausted both times. And I really valued the experience. And I wondered why I'm doing this. You know, I love working with kids. And decided I can't be a teacher. I admire teachers. I totally get what they're doing. I see how hard it is. I have nothing against teachers. I can't do this. I'm just not constructed right to do that. So again, I don't fit. But the part I left out of the story, I don't know why I'm jumping ahead, but when I got my teaching degree, I thought I was interested in special ed because of my previous experience. The place where I got the degree did not have an offering of a special ed endorsement. I couldn't take the training there. I'd have to go somewhere else. So I took the training there because I lived there. Evergreen's a good college generally. But so I took an educational assistant position. We moved down to the Portland area, Portland, Oregon. And I worked for a year in a classroom. Well, actually, I started in the high school, 2 months. I didn't really want to be at the high school level because I wasn't interested in teaching job training for, bagging groceries and stuff. So I switched when I got the opportunity. And 2 months later, I was in the elementary school, upper elementary, where they were actually teaching kids to read and integrating them more with the other kids in the school for PE and stuff. And we only had 11 kids, but they were seriously challenged. Some of them talked and some of them didn't. One of the ones who didn't talk had cerebral palsy. He was the only kid in the class with cerebral palsy. And he turned out to be instrumental in my life for 5 years. I couldn't pay all my bills on that salary because my husband wasn't working at the time. And the philosophy of behavior modification didn't quite sit well with me. So I quit that and went into computer programming because on my previous job, I had some training on the job and actually had passed a COBOL test. COBOL, is that still around? I was a database programmer, and I qualified, and I worked for Multnomah County as a programmer, which was great because then I could work with this kid on my own time. This one kid from the class who had cerebral palsy, he could not talk. He was obviously understanding what people were saying, and nobody knew what to do with him because he was legally blind. He wasn't blind, but he couldn't control his eyes well enough that you could tell what, he couldn't do eye gazing. He couldn't do eye pointing. He couldn't point. Sometimes he could, but usually he couldn't. And he would laugh at some really sophisticated jokes, and you could ask him questions and he would smile for yes and not smile for no, except that people didn't think that maybe he didn't care. So that came up later. So working with him after I had quit that job on my own time while I was programming, it was good. I mean, I worked out some communication that other people could use. And that's a long story I won't get into. But I learned to ask questions. And that is, I think, one of the most essential skills of anyone on a spiritual path, or any path maybe, is to challenge your own assumptions, back up, look, get it from different perspectives, and start asking questions and then looking at the assumptions behind that question and ask questions, because you have to start looking at your beliefs, your assumptions, your expectations, because that's how you're creating reality.
Absolutely. And, I think this is one of the issues in our culture. It's one of our biggest issues, is that people don't ask questions, Margaret. It is such a tool, an incredible gift to us in our growth, in our humanity and growth, is to ask questions. And most times we don't want to be asked questions because we don't want to get the answer wrong. And, we don't want to get involved that deeply in the information because something in us knows we're headed down the wrong path. But if we're making money at it and we're surviving with it, we feel safe. You know, I feel like some of what you unfolded there about like the scoliosis is not an accident, and it helped to
Yeah.
keep you tuned in all your life. It helped to keep you tuned in, where if you didn't have it, you might have been off another whole direction, totally devoid of all these deep, beautiful lessons. You came in on purpose that way so that you wouldn't miss the triggers that would cause you to ask the question. It was my car accident that shifted that piece for me because I was stuck in my body for over 2 years. I could not walk for almost 3. And that's what made me do what you did all your life because you thought you had this scoliosis thing and you had to, yeah, and it kept calling you too. Well, my body was trying to call me too, and I wouldn't listen. I was too entrained to the outside world, and my body was giving me signals all over the place, and I wouldn't listen. So the car accident came and like slammed me so that I could take the walk home from the bus ride that I missed. It's like it took me most of my adult life to get there. And yet, when I got there, what you were doing in these little increments all along in your life hit me like a brick in the side of the head. Suddenly, I could do nothing by myself. I had to ask questions. I had to find out oh my God, what can my body do in this moment? What can't it do in this moment? Who do I need help from? You know, it's like, and why do I need this help? Why is this happening to me? Oh my God, suddenly my life was a question. And it was like that for 3 years. It took me into the frequency work that I do, but it took me deeper into understanding who I was. And the fears that drive us to stay in the jobs, like you were clear. Oh my God, this job, yeah, this isn't the best thing for me. This isn't working for my body. I did not have the guts to walk away. You did that. You just said, okay, I'm quitting this job. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, I can't be without a job. You know, one, I was a single parent for a lot of years of my life. I had 3 children. And so making the money was necessary to raise my children. And so that started me in a pattern of this is my comfort life. And so even after the car accident, when I finally got my legs back, I went back into nursing for a while. And everything in me was saying, don't stay there. Don't go back there, you know, because they wanted to amputate my leg. You know, I learned so much in all of that process that I understood I was not being part of the solution in the allopathic medical institutions. And so a part of me wanted to just walk away, but another part of me said, well, my God, I'm licensed in this.
Yeah, I know how that is.
The importance of my licensing is overriding my body's signals. But I did. I went back in and I decided that was when I went into hospice work, on-call hospice work, intense work, and a totally different space in nursing than the hospitals and, you know, that sort of thing. But it was still, a lot of it there was not the best thing for people either at that time in their life. And I kept recognizing that. And the hardest thing for me was that the company did not validate the nurses for what they had to do and were doing. And I mean, we did a 63-hour shift, 3 days on the road. And it was intense. Many weekends, it was intense. And they would just randomly decide, well, we're only going to pay you the mileage to go out. You don't get the mileage to come back home now. Wait a minute. I'm on the road and I'm driving. What do you mean I'm not going to get paid for that? You know? Well, your time with the patient was over. You know, I mean, they would do stuff like that to us. And it was like, well, something is not ringing clear in this picture, you know? So it was like, even though I felt more aligned with the care I was giving to the patients, which was to help them have comfort and understanding at the end of their life, when they were giving up the physical body, I could hold them safely in this is not the end. This is a transition. And so there were many beautiful aspects to that piece of my job. But the day came when Spirit would not let me stay there anymore either. And because I wasn't brave enough to quit, I got laid off. When the company downsized, I was released. And that morning, they called me into the office, not telling us what they were doing. They called me into the office. I had this incredible thing happen to me on my drive to the office that day. I drove over a bridge where there was this huge lake. And I drove over this bridge, and all of a sudden, it was like I wasn't even driving anymore. I wasn't in the car. I looked up, and on a wire directly in front of me was a kingfisher on this huge, incredible bird. And my vision, it was like a telescope. I was just, boom, right up to the bird, and I was looking it right in the eye. And I was just in total captivation. For a moment, I was like out of my body, up in the air with this bird. And the whole time I'm driving across this bridge, and having, no consciousness of the driving. And then as soon as I came back into my body and I realized the bird was still on the wire, and I drove off the bridge and I pulled off the side of the road and I went, oh my God, what just happened? And I heard in my head, I heard an old Bible quote about casting your nets and the nets being filled. And all of a sudden, I knew in an instant, I'm being fired today. I'm being relieved of my job. And I wasn't fired, I wasn't laid off, but I thought, I'm losing my job today. And oh my God, it means something incredible. And there was this huge shift that happened in my body around having to have a job to support myself that made a certain amount of money a year in order for me to feel safe. Suddenly, it was like all bets were off. Suddenly, my whole trajectory of how I carried myself shifted. And I started to just ask the question, okay, I don't have a job. What am I supposed to do now? It's like, what would you have me do today, Spirit? And it's like, I don't know, I don't know like the dynamics within me that shifted, but I do know my whole perspective of everything on the planet shifted that day. And I never worked as a nurse again and didn't want to. A couple of times I told myself, you need to go out and get a job. The mortgage is coming due. And a couple of times I tried, I was like, nope, not doing this. Nope, not going back there. Nope. So I feel like the wisdom that you acquired from the diagnoses of scoliosis is what most people are aspiring to, and they don't even know they are. Like your journey has been deep, and your first real true recollection of it comes from like this 7-year-old where you thought, yeah, that was probably the clearest I've ever been in my life. But in some ways, Margaret, I feel like you are that clear to even recognize that that space exists within you.
Well, yeah, there's certainly some maturity I've gotten around, making assumptions about other people. And I mean, one of my prayers now is, God, show me people the way you see them, because
beautiful.
Yeah.
People invariably show us a side that resonates with something in us. We never see a whole person. We see what they're showing us, and we show them something maybe back. And I'm not always myself. With some people, I'm much more open than with other people, and that has me real curious. Who am I? What's real? What's truth?
Oh, wow.
And I've been, I guess, trying to figure out, how do you interact with people on a social level when there's so much, there seems to be in popular culture, so much manipulation. You look at the advertising world, it just seems to be all manipulation.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And I think that everybody's waking up to that whole question of what is truth. Since our last president seemed to think that whatever he said, that's his truth, and now we've got alternate truths. Well, we've always had alternate truths.
Yes.
We've always had people operating from their own system of beliefs. And, you know, if you think you have to trick people into buying your product, that's really kind of sad. But I'm just a marketer. I'm just going to convince people to click this link because that's my job. And then we get into the whole thing about authenticity and stuff. Well, why do we even need to be talking about that? Where did we go wrong? And yet, I can see, you know, people have been known to kill each other. So there is a valid physically based fear thing. And yet, people will respond to you differently depending on your energy. So whether you're going to be killed by your enemy or your enemy is going to say, wait, you're not the person I thought you were. It really depends on you.
Yes.
A lot.
Yes. And your energy will trigger spaces in people that they may otherwise not allow to open up. If they feel like a frequency of safety, support, acceptance, you know, unconditionality, it will allow them to access a part of themselves that they would not access in front of people normally. To me, that's a really valuable piece, what you're talking about.
There's one thing I want to bring up here, and I'm going to backtrack a little bit, where you said about wanting to fit in and not be seen. That, to me, reminded me of the shoal of fish who are being chased by a predator, and they work as one entity. There's a herd protection there. That makes me think that our old paradigm that humanity's carried forward for so long has been within that herd mentality. And it's been promoted by people in authority. Whereas if we stayed with the spiritual side of who we are, we would recognize and laud and praise and be happy with that individuation. There's a juxtaplay there between the herd training that we've had over centuries and who we really are as a spirit.
And there's an interesting little giggle of the universe in that.
Oh, only one.
Well, that the herd mentality thing that you're talking about is the concept of safety in numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And although for the animalistic aspect of many different types of animals, that's important.
Yes.
And the youngest and the oldest oftentimes get weeded out when there is food being preyed on. And yet, although we're not intended to like cling together and pretend we're bigger than life because we're all together and so you can't hurt us, we are one. We are one. You know, we cannot not be one. And yet that aspect is the limbic brain protection mode, where in the aspect of really being the one, we know, one, we can't die. Two, there will be a time that we choose to lay this body down and we'll move on. And this has nothing to do with the limbic brain. It has to do with what you were just saying, Margaret, what I thought was so powerful is what is real? What is real? We look at everything in our world and we think this is our reality and this is the stuff that we've created. But this is not what is real. What is real is the energy that created this stuff. That's who we are. That's our reality. And when we come into that space, then I think we can lovingly be in the spaces that you have shared with so many people that the world would determine is special needs. We will call them different than us. And most people are kind of afraid to be with people like that because they don't know how to respond to them and they don't know how to treat them normal. And to me, those people call us to our grandest expression. They call us to our true acceptance of all of life. And my daughter-in-law has a brother, and he is 28 now, I think. And he is special needs, has the kind of intellectual content of about a 5-year-old, can typically verbalize his needs, but is extremely anxious about everything. And my feeling when I'm with him is that his anxiety is based in everybody's concern about not letting him get out of control. He's a really big boy bodily. And so everybody has these concerns. Oh, don't let him get hurt. Oh, don't let him get into that. Oh, don't let him, it's like there's all this family information of how they have to control his motions so that he stays in a safe, calm space. And that makes him anxious. And it's like, I would always feel when I was with him, oh, just let this kid act the way he wants to act. He would sit a couple times. I would be left at the house with him. He would come into the kitchen where I would be making food for my grandson, who is, my daughter's little boy. So her brother would be there and she'd look after him now and then. And he would come into the kitchen, sit in the kitchen floor and sing to himself. Be like, yeah. All he needs is just like, don't worry about him and he'll be good.
See, we've labeled them special needs.
Well, we've
made them abnormal.
Yeah. And when it's not your family, Margaret, I think you're in a totally different place with people. You're coming to them like fully open, where if it's your family, you may have some concepts of what's good for them, what's not good for them, in a teacher mode or in a support mode like you had with people, you come to that plate to open up a space for them to experience and express and to grow. And so your attachment to them is completely different than a family member's.
Yeah, family dynamics, they tend to work themselves into patterns. And that's interesting, too. I don't have any children, so I haven't known that as a parent. I can only speak to being a child once and seeing other families. But definitely, I know I've interrupted some family dynamics sometimes.
Thank God, probably. Is that hard from a point of being the teacher or the support system? Is that a hard place to be with the family?
It can be. If I see something that challenges something that the parent is sure that, the kid is this way, and it's like, well, maybe. I have an example from my parents. It's kind of funny. My mom was very ill over a decade ago. She died about 11 years ago, but it was 3 years before then. And she was in the hospital for several months. And she was worried that my dad wouldn't like what I cooked for him. It had to be exactly the way she knew he liked it. Mm-hmm. And so she was giving, from her hospital bed, she's giving me these instructions on just how to cook for my dad so that I can take care of him, because that's what she had always done. She had always tended to his needs. I realized later that it gave her the life that she wanted. Back in the day when you could be a housewife, she really thrived in that. She decorated her house. She was an artist of sorts and had her garden. And I got a lot from my mother because I love gardening too. But anyway, I cooked some things because I had been an adult for a while, I had cooked on my own.
It doesn't matter. You have to cook the right way.
And I wanted to cook things that I wanted to eat too. I liked a lot of what she would have cooked, but I did some experiments. I like what somebody in college said, cooking is infinite. And that has always stuck with me. I never follow a recipe. I always adapt it to what I have and what I like. So I would change it a little bit. And my dad liked it. And I think I kind of bothered her a little bit for a while, but generally she was glad I was there. I just thought it was funny, though.
Yeah. It's very interesting that, and especially the wife, having taken care of a husband for so long. My mother had some of that going on too, right before she passed away. Your father likes sausage gravy with blah, 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 blah. Your father likes, it's like, my father liked just about anything you could cook is what I found out. But she had certain ways. And I think the old way is patternistic, very patternistic and safe. Yeah. He's been eating that all these years. He'll go on eating that and he'll be happy eating that.
And he's on his deathbed and he says to her, Mabel, I've never liked that.
But it's like a safety zone that they've created. And like you say, the family dynamics become patternistic. And that is a safety zone for everyone because it's been working. Why change it? Yeah. And yet my first question when you first started that story was, Maybe her dad would just like a change up now and then. I wonder if he might have liked a change up now and then. And then, like you said, you'd cook it and he liked it. Oh my God. That's ingenious, isn't it? Crazy. But yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think, it speaks to the human dynamic. And like your mother didn't stop to ask any questions. She just continued on the path that had become comfortable for her. And I think that's the majority of our culture. And that the wisdom of the question asking is probably the most powerful thing you bring today, because in truth, it is one of our crippling issues in our culture.
We're going back to the herd and the individual. If you're in the herd, you don't ask questions. You follow the herd.
Yeah.
Because the herd knows what it's doing. Yeah. The collective
and
consciousness.
You'll get trampled if you don't stay right with
Absolutely. Or get eaten or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas the individual is always asking because it wants to know from its own point of view, what is this? How do I respond to this?
So I'd like to ask a couple of questions, Margaret, that when we first got together and said we were going to talk about, bringing you on to do a radio show, there was a list of things that you sent to us. And there was one that brought up some interesting concepts for me. And I'd like to hear you, if you wish to speak on it today. One of the things that you sent to us was temporary enlightenment. And I thought very interesting. Yeah, a very interesting little snippet.
This sounds like something I could be educated on. Please.
I'm curious what this means to her and how she, how you would bring that forward. So if you'd like to speak with that, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, having been involved with various groups over the years, and especially in my 20s and 30s, I'd see people come in, they suddenly got into this idea that we create our reality, that how I'm thinking and feeling can change my reality, and the meditation can help generate energy. And they get into energy and all that new age stuff that's been around for eons. And, they start getting all excited. And I was all excited. It's like, hey, this stuff works. You start seeing that, yes, I can manifest that parking space. You find out that, yes, you can do these little things, and it's really cool. That lasts 2 or 3 years. And then it's like, well, now what? But I think that what happens is you connect. During that time, you connect. You're connected. It's powerful to feel that connection. And then you keep coming out of it again. And I remember the first ARE conference I went to, the most gorgeous place on the Hood Canal called CBEC, Association for Research and Enlightenment, which is based on Edgar Cayce, would meet there. And they used to do week-long ones. And I think now they're probably still doing the shorter ones because it was just hard to keep it going for a week and get speakers and people to commit for a whole week at a time. But back in the 80s, they had it for a week. And I couldn't handle it. I was there for a few days, and it's like, wow, this is like all this energy and all these really cool people. And you could just see their eyes were like full of light. I mean, I could tell, and a lot of them were older, but they, their spirits, they didn't move like they were older. Even if they were handicapped, there was something about them that had this light. And if you've ever been, you know what I'm talking about. And at that time, one of the speakers was Charles Thomas Cayce, who was the grandson of Edgar Cayce, and a really sweet man, not pretentious, not at all arrogant. He asked if someone would volunteer to pick up his wife at the airport. And this is one of those things that I am so glad I did it. All I had was this little Volkswagen Beetle. And then it was the typical loud engine and stuff. But I had to get out of there because it's like I needed to see the contrast between the real world and that world. And I was just so happy to get out of there. And at the same time, it was such an honor to be able to pick up his wife at the airport. And she brought one of their 2 daughters at the time. It was such a wonderful drive, and a beautiful drive, too. I mean, if you know the Puget Sound area, it's just gorgeous. And we had a great discussion in the car, and I never would have gotten to do any of that otherwise. But I also felt like I had to get out of there. Now, if I had to get out, maybe that urge was so that I'd go pick her up. Or maybe it was because I just felt overwhelmed. I think it was some of both. I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity. And then I came back and I was fine for the rest of it. But it was like right in the middle of it. I just felt like I had to get out. I think that that idea of temporary enlightenment is that people, I think everybody has in them times when they connect. And it could be at a football game. I keep thinking of the group energy, but some people pick up on that group energy during the football game. And if it's during a spiritual reality or something, you think, oh, this is something. I've got a guru now. I'm onto something. It's the same energy, maybe with a twist for football games, a little bit more physical. There's this energy, and people put interpretations on it. But that's when you come back. When you're connected, and you know. But as soon as you come back, it's like, well, what was that all about? And that's when I think people get misled sometimes into thinking that because they knew, that they still know. So you have to be humble. You know, if you're not connected, you're speaking from your interpretations. When you're connected, that's real. And explaining that in physical reality terms can be difficult. I think that there have been some so-called gurus who had something and lost it because they got enamored of their position. This is just a suspicion I have. I won't name anybody in particular. But, you know, I definitely resonate with some people better than others. I think that all of us at some time feel that connection. My dad had it after his brother was shot down or crashed in World War II. He felt that his brother visited him. You know, that was a similar connection, maybe not to God, but to something greater than himself. I'm certainly not enlightened. I won't say that I'm enlightened, but I think I have moments of that connection. I think we can all get there. I think the more you practice, that's why they call it a practice, the more you're likely to get there. But you will have times when, like I still do, you know, it's like, well, help my unbelief. These days, I don't also say, you know, I'm having trouble connecting, and it's because I'm having trouble getting out of the physical and getting back to that space. Yeah. So my prayer now is, help me. I need healing. I'm praying for other people, but hey, if I'm feeling something, I need to pray for myself. And that goes along with another idea. This year has been pretty wild for me. The idea that, you know, we don't have any secrets from God. God knows what we're doing. Whatever you think God is, offer it up. Your problems off. You offer up your problems because you need to let go. I don't know if I can say it any better than that. Just, you know, nothing is too small. Anything that's an obstacle is an obstacle. Let it go. If you give it to God, if that means something to you, then offer it up to God and say, hey, help.
Yeah.
This is a question I want to ask the two of you then, because that brings something up that's very current for me. In fact, happened this morning, because it dawns on me. That's where my head was at. I need to ask for help. And then the question arises, well, who and or what am I asking for help?
Yeah.
And in what form, and how would it be received? Because there are no answers. No, there's no manual. Are we making this up as we go along?
Well, and you just went into some really intellectual aspects of, and how will it be received? How, you know, all of a sudden the brain gets engaged. Mm-hmm. If the heart just stays open to, I need help right now. Help me. You know, to me, what you are asking is your higher self, God, is your connection to source, the divine, however you perceive that. And what I have learned with most of my clients is it's not the inability to ask for help. When we finally get to that point, like you were saying, this morning I just knew I need to ask for help. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, ask for help, but we don't, what you said, Margaret, offer it up. We don't release it. We don't go, okay, we've asked for help, now let it go. It's like we ask for help and then we keep trying to fix it. Whatever it is we think is wrong, you know? And so for me, where I am in my process right now is that divinity of it is to understand that nothing is wrong and that all of it is here to trigger an opening, a portal in me, an expansion of a new way of perceiving.
So perhaps the question is, why does this perfection feel like crap right now?
That you're not going to get a good intellectual. I mean, you could get an intellectual answer, but I don't think it will ever satisfy you.
Good, Margaret.
I've never taken NLP training, but I understand when you start looking up, you're looking for some kind of higher connection. It's like something's going on inside me, but I don't know what to say. I think we have to stay humble. I worked with a wonderful programmer once who said, and he had at one time been a minister. He said, half of what I know is probably wrong. Either I misheard it, the person who was telling me didn't understand, or they had misheard it. You know, it's like we get so much secondhand information, and we're taught how to interpret things, and we learn how to interpret things based on our imperfect understanding. And I think that not knowing is okay. And I think that if you tell yourself, well, I don't know. I've been playing with memory, actually. I've always had trouble sometimes remembering names, just as an example. And I know it's in there. You know, it's like that still small voice is in there, too. It's like, I remember driving through Carmel, California once when I was on vacation and thinking, you know, past mayors who were famous that I knew of Carmel, including Clint Eastwood. And I couldn't think of his name. I couldn't think of Clint Eastwood's name. And of course, I know that name. I've known it my whole life. He's a famous actor. I've watched his movies, you know. And I'm driving along thinking, well, I'm sure, you know, I've learned because I forget things like that and they come back to me. If I try to hassle it too much, I won't remember it. If somebody asks me a name, I won't remember it. But if I just relax with it, it just pops up. And, you know, by the time I get out of Carmel, there it was again. Clint Eastwood. Oh, yeah, right. I know that name. I think a lot of times, I wonder how we store memories anyway. That's a whole possibly related topic, because I have a suspicion that we don't actually store them in our brains. I mean, Edgar Cayce could tune into the so-called Akashic records, whatever those are, and tune into other people's memories from other lives. And that's kind of weird. Of course, maybe he was making it up, but I tend to think that it's valid. In any case, I think connecting with our higher self is sometimes like retrieving an old memory. And you just know, you know, how do you know that what you remember is real? Well, you know, and yet I digress forever. There's some experiments that kind of show that people change their memories over time, which goes along with changing their past. But maybe we really don't know anything when it comes down to it, and yet it's all there. It's like knowledge. Maybe it's knowledge for everybody. Maybe it's all there that we can tune into, and that's how a lot of inspiration happens.
I think you described very clearly a few minutes ago how new religions are formed. We train ourselves from our imperfect knowledge, our imperfect understanding. To me, that's how new religions are always formed.
And they're formed all the time, aren't they?
I find everything that you're saying very powerful and interesting. It brings up some other questions for me around memory also, is that, as you say, we might not actually know anything. We might not actually remember anything as far as it being stuck in our brain. But I have this feeling that there is a portion of our brain, although I don't think our mind, I shouldn't say our brain because it's not in our head. Our brain is in our head. Our mind is not in our head. And yet there is a portion of memory, I think, that it has a holding space somewhere. And I'm speaking to the memory that triggers us in some way to respond to something now in a particular way based on the patterns that memory set in us at a very young age. And it's a very interesting space for me because what I understand is that much younger, I had a lot more of that memory intact. It would trigger in me fears that would cause me to act a certain way because my upbringing as a child was very intense and very abusive. And so there were protective mechanisms put into place to both protect me emotionally and physically. And so what I find now is that a lot of those memories are gone. It's like I know things happened that were horrifying. there are a few that I can still remember clearly. And what I feel inside about those few that I still can remember clearly is that there is still some trauma, some part of myself that I gave away in that moment of fear, in that moment of abuse, whatever it was. There is still some trauma that I have not completely released. I've not completely looked at it. I've not completely, I don't have my divine understanding about it yet, because I feel like a lot of those things that were so clear to me as a younger adult are now gone. And in some ways, I even think of them, if they do come up, they don't have the energy that they had when it happened to me as a child. They have a totally different energy of, oh my God, I came here to experience that so that I would have this peace. It's like the energy around it is so different. And so, yeah, the memory thing is it's very interesting to me, because I think that there are pieces that until we get what for us individually is perhaps an expansion of our growth in humanity, until we get that piece of information, it is a memory that can terrorize us or use us or direct us. And it sticks with us until we clear it.
We used a phrase a few moments ago, temporary enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's such a thing as partial enlightenment too. That we get clarity in certain areas, but other areas are still grey or shielded. That's what it feels like. I hark back to when I first arrived in America. I was down in Florida and going through a lot of emotional stuff back then, and reached through reading a lot of what I understood then to be spiritual books or energetic books, if you will. I reached a place of peace and tranquility within. And I thought, you've cracked it. But if I look back on the years since then, it was partial enlightenment. It wasn't anything complete. It was definitely temporary as well.
What you're saying, too, about the memory, what we focus on, what gets into memory, I really think it depends on our focus, what we give importance to. I have a sister-in-law. She's been a waitress, and she's a really good cook. And she would remember what I ate at a restaurant the last time I went there. I don't remember. I don't put that, I like good food, but I don't remember what I ate. It's like, and my ex-husband was the same way. That both of them could remember what I ate at a particular restaurant and whether or not I liked it. What I remember is what I found valuable, what I give importance to, what fits with my focus at that time and now. But there's plenty of things that have happened to me that I don't remember. And sometimes it kind of bothers me when my friend will bring something up that sounds like it was important, certainly to her, and I don't have a recollection at all. And she may not remember it the same way that I saw it in the first place. So
yeah,
a lot of things that we think are true from a different perspective may not be the same. If we knew more, we might see it differently ourselves.
Yeah. And based on our own histories, certain things will feel valuable to us that may not feel valuable to another person at all. And so we'll put our attention there and we'll remember it. Like, obviously, these two people who are remembering all your food has a pretty big value for them. Where it occurs to me that maybe the value for you in that restaurant encounter was the relationship thing and the interaction that you were having with people rather than what you were eating. So you're right. Whatever we put our value and our attention on is probably going to be the thing that's going to be in our memory that we'll be triggered about the next time we think about that particular situation.
Which ties into how we define ourselves too, because, I tell you my life story. Well, I could tell you a very different life story with a different focus, depending on the context of what we were talking about. And that's true of everyone. And I think that the older I get, the more I realize that everyone has their life stories. If we could see it from their perspective, we'd just be amazed.
Oh, yes. I think you're perfectly right there. I think the more that I age, the clearer that piece is to me, is that I am viewing this from my perspective, and I really don't know their perspective. And so oftentimes my desire is to see their light, to just know them, just know them, and to not even have a thought about their perspective, so to speak, but to come to a kind of a divine connection with them so that I can be whatever is the greatest expression I can bring for them in this moment. And oftentimes that, like you said, that will leave me moving through the space with them in the most loving, conscious way I can, and then walking away sometimes with no memory of a lot of it, because my whole desire was just to be present for them. And sometimes that means that I'm going to do something different in that moment, or I'm going to assist them in some way, or I'm just going to observe. I mean, to me, that was one of the most powerful things you said. And you've kind of been an observer all your life. Oh my God, we'd be different people if we were all observers. I mean, that's huge. It's huge. And so I feel like your journey has been a very spiritual one from very young, Most of us get it when we're much older, Margaret, but you have been carrying that torch of staying connected with the divine in so many different ways on your journey that I find it really beautiful and really powerful.
My question is, how is it playing out now? Where has it brought you to?
Well, I am in transition. I'm probably always in transition. I don't think I ever
But this is an obvious one, is it?
I had a friend who was a difficult friend, you know. He passed away in October, and he wrote some of the most gorgeous lines because he was also, you know, struggling with who am I, how do I connect, and he got really quite crabby at the end of his life. But he had moments when he would just light up. He had an art therapist who was absolutely wonderful, and he'd like report how much energy he had from this art therapy session where he wouldn't do art. He had been a dancer. He'd take these crayons and dance with them and point them, and I don't know if he hardly ever actually applied them to paper. Yeah, so he just passed away, and I was spending a lot of time working from California. He lived in Canada, and he had some wonderful people who tried to help him, and he would be really crabby with them too. And the last two women were so wonderful, and they stuck with him, and you know, they tell me everything that went on. So I was like, I was getting to hear it. So I kind of knew what was going on. And I think they needed me there to keep them from quitting because he was really a little hard. But I want to read what he wrote a year before his passing, after one of these art therapy sessions that woke him up. And he and I had kind of we had tried to be lovers for a short time. It didn't work out. But we stayed friends. And I kind of think this poem relates to me, but it relates, I think, to everybody. So if I may, it's not very long. He says, our faces are the same, our starlight, until we say the word I and I am, whereupon our light coalesces, condenses, covers itself with the skin of our individuality, and therein our journey here in this solid realm begins. In a loved one's eyes, we may see that starlight and know that we are born of the same mother source. And as we argue and our relationship is challenged, always there is the reality that left hand is simply clapping right hand on the same body, that love has not left us, although it may seem so at times. And tentatively, we begin to sense that love does not stop at our skin, that you and I are more than we seem, that we are starlight, that we are beings of a light everlasting, come to this earth in this same time and space, only to return eventually to our source. As the rays of starlight recede in our eyes, the back door of our being explodes open, and we fall into the arms of our mother, from whence we came and never really left. This, I feel, is our journey. And it is not I here and now who is writing these words with tears of melting stars.
Yes, that's very powerful.
Can you send me a transcription of that, Margaret, please?
I can send you a web link. He had given me a copy, and I really hadn't looked at it much at the time. I don't know why. It just didn't I liked it. But then he also gave it to his art therapist. And the night before he passed on, she came across it in some of her papers that she was sorting through. And the funny thing about that is there was another poem that I put on the same website along with some of his other writings that he had written like in 2017, I think. And it just opened itself up on my computer. I mean, I had the Word document copy of it. And I've had things selected and hit enter before and had things open up that I didn't intend to open up. So I know how that theoretically can happen. But why that document at that time? And I swear it must have opened in the background because I did not see it open. All of a sudden it was there when I closed something else. And I knew at that time he was in the hospital and not in a very good space, not a lot of energy, and crabby's a good word. I was actually kind of afraid to read it to him, but I felt like I needed to. And, it wasn't open just for me. Yeah. So I read it to him over the phone a day and a half later. And he actually was able to listen to it all. I wasn't sure if he'd even want, I asked him, I told him how it popped open. And I said, do you want me to read it to you? And he said, I don't care. And I took that as a yes. So I read it to him and really listened. And he opened up and he said, that's really good. I want you to publish that. And so I figured that along with some other writing that he had wanted to publish in 2016 or 17, we had talked about it then. So I put all those things up because those were all his inspired pieces. And that goes along with his temporary enlightenment. It's like sometimes he really connected and he would talk about spirit speaking through him. And he would say, that wasn't me. I don't know how to get there. And he'd be looking to me like, help me get there. How do you get there? And it's like, I didn't know what to tell him at the time. I wish I had known because I think I learned some of it at the end of his life. It's like, hey, come back. I can tell you now. No, but I still don't. We go into it. I can't do it for somebody else. I wish I could, but no, you have to find your own way. But he knew his own way sometimes. He got there sometimes. That ties right in with temporary enlightenment. It's stardustdancer.com.
Yeah, I think many times the artists find their way there and they don't even know they do. It's just this deep connection that brings forth some beautiful aspect of themselves in a tangible way that we can experience on the planet. And many times, because they've not been truly validated in it, they don't understand the depth of who they are in that moment. And they'll look back at it and go, yeah, it was a stroke of genius in that moment. Oh, yeah. This is like the real genius.
You don't get it. That is you. It's like Richard Bach, I heard, wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull and didn't know if he should put his name to it because he didn't feel like he had written it. Like it came through him.
Yeah. Yeah. This was his God essence coming forward. And so many times, I think it really does feel bigger than life to us, the aspect of that magnificent, beautiful thing feels like, yeah, we didn't do that. I've had a couple of songs that came out of me like that. And I even have one that I claimed wasn't mine. It belonged to the woman who passed. She had asked me to write a song to sing at her celebration of life. And nothing came, and nothing came, and nothing came. And I just said to her, Betty, I need you to pick a song. I'm happy to do the music for your celebration, but it's not coming. And there's not something you can force, And so what ended up happening was 3 days after she died, I was on my way to work. And everything under the sun that could go wrong was going wrong that day, in the sense of like traffic stop, this road's blocked, blah, blah, and I'm getting later and later. And from the car, like 2 different radio stations came on and said the name Betty so-and-so, blah, 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 blah. And I immediately just triggered on Betty, knowing that, I was learning a new song that she had given me for this, celebration of life. And I was thinking, I need to work on that when I get home tonight. And then it happened a second time. Then I'm in a car jam. The cars are going nowhere. And I look in front of me and the license plate says Betty. That's the license plate. Yeah. So then we get a little further down the road, and I look up. There's a road sign on the, one of those big signs on the side of the road, and at the base of it, it's signed Betty. And I'm like, okay, something is going on here. I need to turn around and just go home. That day I called in. I never call into work. Never. That day I called into work. I turned around. I went home. And within a half hour, I was sitting with my guitar, and this entire song, May I Be the Light, came from me.
Wow.
One line right after another. And I was writing. I couldn't put it down fast enough. And so I swear that I did not write that song. Where the hell did it come from? That's Betty's song. That's all I know. It's not mine. Right. And so, yeah, these things happen when you just get out of the way and you connect to something deeper, and what can be expressed from the core of love, from the core of the expanded frequency of the planet. It just comes from you. And sometimes I think, he's right. It doesn't always feel like it's yours, and yet you're it.
Yeah, we define ourselves too narrowly.
Exactly.
That's a different form of herd, isn't it? That's the bigger herd.
I don't know that that's the herd, but that is definitely the oneness. The oneness is the power of everything. And the sooner we get that, the sooner this planet moves into the loving space that we all aspire to. Yeah. So, Margaret, if you were to give what you think are like your sweetest wisdoms right now for people in this crazy time that we're in, there's so much happening right now, and there's so much, for many people, distress, and for many people, anxiety. What is it you would like to share with people to help us to be more centered, closer to our enlightenment at this time?
It makes me laugh because I struggle with it too.
Sure. Don't we all?
May not be the same as what I'm thinking about, but unplug from what's giving you distress and make time to connect with what gives you peace and makes you more loving. So if you need to go sit in the garden instead of whatever it was you were about to do, sometimes it only takes 5 minutes, sometimes even 30 seconds, just getting yourself to stop. So practice stopping and tune in. I remember reading something about the 1 minute meditator. Yes, you can, because time is a physical reality thing, but that connection can be instantaneous.
Yeah.
So try to practice. You don't have to. It's nice to meditate for so and so many minutes or hours a day, but if you don't think you can do that, whatever you're doing, if you're washing the dishes, just try to tune in and have a divine experience washing dishes.
That's beautiful.
I want to share my answer because I wrote it down.
Be love. Yes. That's what to focus on. Focus on love.
And I think you're right about the momentary. If you don't think you can meditate, anything in your life can be a meditation. And I think that was what I uncovered about myself when I was stuck in my body after the car accident, is that I could do so much and I was not in any of it. I was just getting it done so that I could get on to the next thing. And the minute that you become what you're doing, I had an awakening moment with one of my grandsons. He was like 3, just starting to talk good. And he was helping me wash the dishes. And all of a sudden he says, he was standing on a stool in front of me, and we were in front of the sink washing the dishes together. And he said, "Do you see it, Grandmama?" And I said, "Do I see what?" He said, "Right there, look in it." And there was a bubble on the side of a glass. And he was looking into the bubble, soap bubble, and seeing something magnificent. And I just went, "Oh my God." all of a sudden, washing the dishes became something incredibly magnificent through the eyes of this little child looking into a soap bubble. And I realized in that moment, wow, how much am I missing? How much am I missing?
Yea, though ye shall see with the eyes of a child, ye shall not enter heaven, or something like that.
Something like that, yeah. Unless you come as a child.
I was never saying.
George always makes up scriptures.
I've read my own Bible. It's wonderful.
But yes, I think that's really beautiful, Margaret, because I think anything that we do can be that beautiful, that incredible, that magnificent if we are being that process instead of just doing it to get it done. That's a really powerful piece of information. Thank you. And so I think we're going to bring our time today to a close. Thank you so much for everything you shared today. It's been wonderful to have this time with you. I hope you have a beautiful week. Thank you so much.
You too. I can now tell my dad that I'm going to be a celebrity.
Hey,
absolutely. Do it. Oh, perfect. Aloha, dear.
Aloha.
Aloha.